Today, hunted by debt collectors. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, one that is supposed to covering finance and prop news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Well, I've had over the last couple of weeks a chance to speak with a number of debt counsellors across the country because they are frantically busy at the moment trying to deal with households who are in debt and trying to manage that whole debt problem cycle. It's getting worse, no surprise for those following my mortgage stress analysis. But tonight I wanted to tell you about my own experience because I have actually been experiencing over the last few months the worst end of the debt collector nightmare. Now, the story is this. My wife died last December. And so on the 23rd of December, I sent messages to all of those providing services to my late wife, including those providing services for her mobile phone. I actually used their website to send a web form to tell them that my wife had died and that they needed to cancel the contract. Now, I heard nothing more, and so I assumed that that was all in order. Of course, I didn't have access to her online credentials to be able to go in and see what the status of her account was, nor indeed what the current state of play was. But she was on a monthly plan and would pay from her account each month via the credit card. Now, of course, her credit card was also cancelled at the same time. What I didn't know was that the telecommunications company didn't actually action that notice. So the debt for her phone started to pile up. And of course, as each month went by, the amount outstanding grew. Now, I knew nothing about this until about April, when I suddenly started getting automated calls from an unknown debt recovery company. Now, these calls were completely automated. They'd phone at odd times through the day, often in the morning, then in the afternoon, and sometimes in the evening too. And I counted up, and some weeks I got more than 12 or even 14 calls. Now, I didn't answer those calls because I could hear that it was an automated call. And of course, I get quite a few of those, people trying to sell me things or other perhaps scam calls. And because I didn't know that there was anything outstanding in terms of debts, I assumed it was a scam call. Anyway, this went on. And when I got to about September time, I thought, well, I better see what's going on. So I did actually, at that point, answer the call and was then put into a queue. And that queue just went on and on and on, and nobody actually took my call. So I dialed off. And I did that the subsequent few times, but they kept phoning several times every day to the point where I felt it was harassment. And then eventually they sent a letter to my late wife and said that they were chasing this debt. So the telco company had passed the debt to the debt collector, and the debt collector was now threatening court action to recover the $300 or so outstanding, including charges. So I went back to the phone company and told them of the issue, and they apologised and wrote the debt off. But what I wanted to talk to you about was the experience that I had just being continually harassed by this debt collecting company who would never disclose who they were, what they were phoning about. They just kept phoning saying there was an outstanding account. Now, this is a very tricky situation because, of course, on one hand, the debt collector has an obligation to try and recover the debt, but also they have to do it within certain parameters to make sure that they're not harassing people. In my case, I believe I was harassed, and I ultimately have made a complaint. I'll be interested to see what they say. But there are two quite interesting documents that it's worth understanding relating to the whole process of debt collection. The first one is guidance from the ACCC, which is directed directly at those who are in the debt collecting business. And by the way, it's a booming business at the moment. So it's called the Debt Collection Guideline for Collectors and Creditors. And it's quite interesting if you look at what they say about contacting a debtor. You have obligations to protect the privacy of debtors. Before being sure that you are dealing with a debtor, if requested by the person you're dealing with, then you may do so. And they say that you can contact for a reasonable purpose only, and that's communications with the debtor must always be for a reasonable purpose and should only occur to the extent necessary. Now, the definition of contact is quite interesting. Contact with a debtor or other person is interpreted widely. It includes, but not limited to, communications by phone, including circumstances where the recipient, debtor, or other person elects to terminate the call, or where a voice message is left on a recording device, or where a message of any kind is delivered to the recipient. And you can communicate in writing or in person. And they also talk about continuous contact where there's a chain of discussion. So let's be clear about what this actually implies. Contact is actually when somebody has picked up the phone or when a message has been left. Or in other words, them phoning and just getting my answer phone and then ringing off is not counted as contact, which means that they can do it again and again and again. Contact should be distinguished from attempted contact, which, as implies, falls short of contacting the debtor or other person described above. So if you phone the debtor, but the call is unanswered and you don't leave a message on voicemail, that's regarded as attempted contact with the debtor and will not constitute a contact with either party. Now, they won't go on to say the distinction between contact and attempted contact should not be construed as an opportunity to continue to attempt to contact a debtor. Depending on the circumstances, continually attempting to contact a debtor or other person may amount to undue harassment. Frequency of contact and Part 3 of the guidance actually refers to that, and we'll look at that in a second. So then it goes on to talk about the hours of contact. By phone, Monday to Friday between 7:30 a.m. and 9 p.m. And yep, they used pretty much all of those windows. And also weekends, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. are fine other than on national public holidays. And turning to frequency of contact, debtors and third parties are entitled to be free from excessive communications from collectors. Communications must always be for a reasonable purpose and should only occur to the extent necessary. Reference to the number of contacts with debtors should be read as the number of contacts per account rather than individual. Unnecessary, unduly frequent contact may amount to undue harassment. We recommend that you not contact a debtor more than 3 times per week or 10 times per month at most when contact is actually made as distinct from attempted contact, and only when it's necessary to do so. Unreasonable frequent attempted contacts may also amount to undue harassment. This may occur, for example, when an automated dialer is used to make calls and the debtor's number is returned to the queue within a short space of time after each attempted contact. Collectors should ensure that attempted contacts are not excessive. But, of course, the point here is that excessive is not defined, so it's left very much to the debt collector to define what excessive is. Well, I can tell you that in my case, having phone calls 2 or 3 times pretty much every day was definitely excessive. It's interesting, of course, that this same guidance covers face-to-face contacts and even visiting a debtor's place of work. So there are some guidelines there, but I have to say I think they're a bit flaky. Now, the other piece of information that's worth referring to, and particularly if you are being harassed by a debt collector, is from the MoneySmart website calling Dealing with Debt Collectors, Your Rights and Responsibilities. This is actually quite a good document. In fact, I'll put links to both documents in the comments below. So this document is about the legal rights and responsibilities, where you can get help, and what to do if a debt collector contacts you, and how to dispute a debt. I'm not going to go through all the different elements of this, but just to say that there's some very useful advice how and when debt collectors can contact you, unacceptable behaviour, and disputing a debt. So if you are on the receiving end of a debt collector, worth reading at all, I think. But let's just look at what they say about how and when debt collectors can contact you. So it says debt collectors must have a good reason to contact you and should take into account your circumstances and any reasonable requests about how and when you want to be contacted. In writing or phone no more than 3 times a week or 10 times per month. Weekdays by phone, 7:30 to 9 p.m. and weekends by phone, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. But of course, this is actually based on contact, not attempted contact. And there is a very important little tip here. Keep a record of any contact. Make sure you keep accurate records and up-to-date records of all communications you have with a debt collector. Very good advice. And they also guide other mechanisms, including social media and email, face-to-face visits, and of course in the mail as well. Now it's worth saying, of course, that debt collectors must have a good reason to contact you, and they can be there to provide information about your account, make a demand for payment, or indeed, if a payment arrangement is in place, offer to settle the account or make alternative arrangements, etc., etc. And even to inspect or recover mortgage goods if they have the right to do so, or to get an explanation if you've not responded to contact from them. And they do provide some guidance with regard to unacceptable behaviour by debt collectors, forced trespass or intimidation. You mustn't use physical force, you mustn't threaten to damage property, block access to the property, remain on the property when asked to leave. Harassment, verbal abuse or overbearing behaviour, that includes shouting, using obscene or racist language, and must not contact you more than necessary or at unreasonable times. And of course, the debt must not be misleading or false. So my point is this. We know that there are many households now who are going to be confronted with the overbearing actions of debt collectors. So it's very important that people understand what the rules are, and of course also the debt collection agencies understand too. And if indeed you are in the situation where you are being over-contacted, like I was, then make a complaint and make sure that the debt collecting agency itself are fully aware of your concerns. Because the bottom line is this: you may owe debt, and if you do, of course, you have an obligation ultimately to repay it. But that does not mean that anybody should use overbearing force or overbearing contact to try and get debts repaid. And I can tell you, having lived through it for the last few months, that it is a very troublesome experience, and it's one that I hope that people won't ever have to experience. But my concern is that many may, so those resources may provide some support and guidance to those who are in difficulty. And finally, I'll just leave you with this thought, that the National Debt Helpline on 1-800-007-007 is an excellent and free resource to get advice and help if you are actually in debt. I think it's very important to understand that if you do have debts, you can't ignore them because they'll come after you. But there are also rights and obligations, both from debt collectors and also from debtors. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.